Good day, good people of the internet, and welcome to a more experimental kind of video. This is something that I don't normally do and may never do again, but additionally I might do it again. Who knows? But this is going to be a discussion on UFC 234 and brief discussion on 235 potentially. It's unscripted but guided. So you'll hear me ramble a bit, but you'll also have a guide to snap me back to reality. So, if you enjoy this kind of video, which you might not, because there is not a lot of good MMA discussion content out there. I mean, there is some. There's Jack Slack, Heavy Hands, etc., etc., etc. I'll be doing that a lot. But there's not a lot of from the ground up kind of content, and that's what I aim to produce here. So with all that in mind, let's get to it. So I'm going to be discussing the main and co-main events of UFC 234, which airs today, which occurs today, which is today, which are Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum, and Anderson Silva versus Israel Adesanya. Two really competitive fights. At least that once you get past the surface level of struggling welterweights, and old Silva versus new Silva. Once you get past that, that's when you get into the good stuff. So let's start discussing. Let's start with the main event. Robert Elder Scrolls Online Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum. My pick for this fight is Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker went through 2 wars with Yoel Romero, took his best shots, and didn't go down. Well, went down, didn't go out. He has insane durability, and I don't believe that Gastelum punches as hard as Yoel. It's possible, of course. It's definitely possible. Definitely possible. But I don't know. Plus, Whittaker has insane defense and recovery. And he combines that with his wrestling. Unlike TJ Dillashaw, he actually went for a single leg on Romero, and he succeeded. He is adept at not being hit by strikes at their full power. That's something that I think is underrated with him. He does something to mitigate the power of most shots that he takes, with the exception of those 2 flush hooks from Romero. And of course, Whittaker's technical ability is virtually second to none in the division. I would say it's only surpassed by Israel Adesanya, just in terms of technical striking ability and technical grappling ability. Not grappling, but Adesanya, we don't know about his grappling that much. But in terms of striking, he's such a good, solid technician. He's not much of a brawler, although he has been lured into brawls as well. He really is the GSP of the division. Just such a solid jab, solid leg kicks, extremely good game planning abilities. I would say the key factor of this fight is the jab threat. Whichever one manages to out-jab the other is the one who's going to win the fight. Whether that be Gastelum, the master of the 1-2, or Whittaker, Bobby Knuckles, the Reaper. The jab threat is what they can build off the entire fight, as both have a very jab-centric game plan. Well, not game plan. They both have a jab-centric style. Whittaker pumps the jab like nobody else in the division. He's got such a solid, amazing jab that managed to hurt Romero. He doubles up, triples up, sometimes quadruples up, couples it with a hook, or sneaks in that extremely tricky head kick. And his head kicking ability is severely underrated. He has dropped almost every single opponent he's fought with it. Or at the very least, he's dropped his last few with it. Gastelum, however, has dropped every single opponent with his 1-2, or his 3-2. His lead hook rear hand, or his lead jab rear hand. He's just, like, I don't think there's a single fighter, except maybe Max Holloway, who has mastered the 1-2 as well as Kelvin has. He varies the timing of it, the pacing, he varies the rhythm of it, and that's what you really play with in order to catch people clean. You vary rhythm, and he chains it off of anything. He chains it off of slips, off of other strikes like a hook. He chains it off of just forward pressure. He chains it off of whiffed strikes, not necessarily slipped strikes. So if he can generate that jab threat, he can combat that into his 1-2 and give Whittaker a bad time. However, Whittaker has displayed an insane ability to adapt and game plan away. He knows that that's his best weapon. So, there was a video by The Weasel released earlier today that showed Whittaker's plan is to, or potentially his plan, is to switch his stances to, I'll have to find the specifics here. Let's see. His plan seems to be generate jab threat. Wait until Gastelum comes in close, because once he comes in within range, he's firing off that 1-2, that's for certain. And then once he comes within range, firing off the 1-2, just that boom, quick combination, he's going to switch to southpaw, circle out, counterpunch. Switch to southpaw, land a big left straight, and just ruin Gastelum's day, potentially. That seems to be his game plan on the feet. We have yet to see what he does on the ground, if it does go to the ground. Whittaker has underrated wrestling. Yeah, from the video footage from his open workout, it looks like Whittaker is firing off he's switching to southpaw, then firing off the lead hook, circling out, firing off the rear straight. Yeah, that's what it seems to me. Of course, that might not be the case in the fight. It might be a case of deceptive open workouts. It very well might. That's just what it seems like to me. So, moving on to Anderson Venom Silva versus Israel, the penultimate stylebender, Adesanya. I don't know why, but that cracks me up. My pick here is Adesanya, but it's an extremely close fight. And this is simply because of their speed. This is simply because of Adesanya's speed, his feints, his ability to feint, his youth, his goodness, can't say that word today. Kickboxing experience and his aggression. Silva is a counter puncher. He's a counter striker, not counter puncher. He catches you as you come in, as you overextend, as you overcommit. He gets you frustrated with antics, and then he cleans your clock. Adesanya does the same thing, except he provokes counters with strikes of his own. He'll come in with a 1-2, drop his hands, sway backwards against a lunging left hook, catch you over the top with a right hand, follow it up, and then follow that into the high kick, basically baiting you. The whole entire string is to bait you into his high kick, or a knee, or some other counter. And he's 10 steps ahead of you, and you don't even know what game you're playing yet. Adesanya is that good. Silva is that good too, but the problem is Silva is older. That said, his most recent fights against Daniel Cormier, Michael Bisping, and Derek Brunson, not in that order, I don't think, have been absolute complete. Like, they haven't been shutouts, they haven't been domination. They have been competitive showings for Silva. They genuinely have. Silva still has the power to hurt Daniel Cormier, who is a heavyweight. I mean, at the time he was light heavyweight, but still. He has the power at middleweight to damage someone who went up to heavyweight with a front kick to the body. And we know DC is a little bit fat, so that's a lot of padding he had to penetrate. That sentence did not sound right. Point being, Silva still has power. Against Bisping, he had speed, he had reflexes, he had defense. He was very rarely caught clean until after he arguably KO'd Bisping. At which point, well, I think the theory is he started to coast. He started to coast assuming the rest of the fight was his, and it wasn't. But against Brunson, he still landed some solid shots. Granted, Adesanya put Brunson away within a round, but that's MMA math, and that's never reliable. The point is that both of them are very, very similar stylistically. Brunson was definitely his worst performance yet, but that's not saying much. He was still competitive, still landing. He was just grappled. And that's not Adesanya's game plan. That said, Adesanya doesn't overcommit to strikes like Silva's earlier opponents do. Adesanya is absolutely the best striker that Silva will have ever fought. Absolutely. And that is worrying for me as a fan of Silva, but also encouraging as a fan of Adesanya. I'm a fan of both these guys. I don't want either of them to lose. I would really love to see... I don't know. I don't know what I want the result to be. But anyway, Adesanya is an aggressive fighter, but he's a calculated aggressive fighter. He doesn't overextend. He has perfect technique. He is genuinely, I believe, the future of the middleweight division, perhaps the future of the UFC. He's young. He's had, I think, 50, 75 kickboxing fights, 7 boxing fights, 15 MMA fights, undefeated in MMA, lost only, I think, 5 times in kickboxing, maybe 3, and lost only once in boxing. That's still a lot of losses, but over a lot of fights as well. That's a lot of fights. And Adesanya, he has what I would say is the most important factor. Well, 2 of the most important factors. He has patience and he has feints. Bisping feinted Silva's head off during their fight. Bisping managed to out-feint a marvelous counter-striker. He managed to draw out counters and let Silva swing at air. Then followed up with counters himself. Now, Adesanya, he's a much better striker than Bisping. And he loves his feints. He does hip feints, which allow him to feint a kick by thrusting his hips forward. Yes, I know. He pushes his hips forward, which provokes a covering up or a slip backwards, which then potentially also provokes a counter. He also throws jab feints and just arm feints to provoke counters upstairs. Ultimately, Adesanya is good in all the areas where Silva is bad, and also good in the areas where Silva is good. That's why I think that Adesanya has this. That said, it's a very competitive fight. Silva hasn't had a bad performance until Brunson. And Brunson draws bad performances out of anybody. Except for, well, Adesanya, but that's still not saying a lot. Because Adesanya never has a bad performance. So, yes, my pick is Israel, the penultimate stylebender, Adesanya. Oh, I decided before this video that I would give them all goofy, stupid nicknames. and I carried that over into my UFC 235 discussion, which I'm going to get into in just a moment, but I think that's the funniest one I've come up with yet, at least to me. So let's get into UFC 235 preview, because that's coming next month, and I don't know that I'll make a video on this next one. And I want to have a lot of content to discuss here. This could be like a podcast format. I would like that. That'd be nice. Like, yeah, that would be really nice. So UFC 235 has a lot of good fights. Now, I'm making a rule here. I'm not going to discuss fights that I don't know fighters, in which I don't really know fighters. I made one exception here, and that's Cody Garbrandt versus Pedro Munoz, but that's because I know Cody. Okay, so let's get into it. So we have John Jones versus Anthony Smith. We have Tyron Woodley versus Kamaru Usman. We have Robbie Lawler versus Ben Askren. We have Cody Garbrandt versus Pedro Munoz. And we have Jeremy Stevens versus Zabit Magomedsharipov. I'm just going through like the main card fights on cards that I know stuff about. I'm knowledgeable, but I'm not infinitely knowledgeable about MMA. So I have gaps, I have lapses in my knowledge. So let's discuss my brief picks, because I'll probably make a more in-depth video about 235 once it comes around, if you folks like this. So let's discuss. So we have John Picogram Jones versus Anthony Fed the Lions Smith. I like that one too. My pick here is Jones, although I hope Smith pulls it off somehow. I don't like Jones, but the reason I'm picking Jones, picograms. Yep, that's it. Steroids. Key factor here, picograms. Steroids. Yeah, that's all I can really say about it. I don't think Smith really has a chance, but, I mean, anybody has a puncher's chance. So, I mean, may as well. I'll move on to a fight that I'm not really excited for. I don't really care for either of these guys that much. I mean, I enjoy them both, don't get me wrong, but they're never really going on my list of favorite fighters to watch. So we have Tyron Batman Woodley versus Kamaru Wet Blanket Usman. My pick here is Woodley. And the reason for that is Woodley's wrestling pedigree, his superior striking, his just insane power. Woodley is incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful. He has just so much power in his hand. That right hand, like that bomb of a right hand. And Usman does not have very good striking. That said, this has all the hallmarks of a very boring fight. Woodley does not do well against... Well, he does do well against wrestlers, but he doesn't make exciting fights against them. Woodley versus Maya is a good example. So this has all the makings of a very, very uninteresting fight. I mean, we don't know how it's going to work. I think the key factor here is Usman's pressure. If he can generate enough threat to pressure Woodley against the fence, well, that's where he wants to be. That's where he'll explode off the right hand. But if he can generate that pressure and then shoot in, I don't know. Woodley has faced extremely good wrestlers, but Usman is in a league of his own in a way. So it's an interesting fight, for certain, but I don't think Usman has much of a chance to get the belt. So now, Robbie Lawler versus Ben the Drenched Blanket Askren. I couldn't really think of one for that one, so I just kind of went with Drenched Blanket. And my pick, I don't really have a pick here. I like both. It's such a two-sided fight. It's like Conor versus Khabib. It's such a two-sided fight. It can either go one way or another way. There's no in-between. So I'll justify either pick. So for Lawler, I think the reason is Lawler has really, really good takedown defense. And he has vastly superior striking to Askren, and he has that insane amount of pressure. He can generate threat through his strikes, and generating threat is how you get fear. Generating fear is how you win. Now for Askren, the main reason I have here is Smash. Askren is Habib but better, as far as I can tell. He's Woodley's wrestling coach. And Woodley has an insane wrestling pedigree, so Askren is even better. It's really interesting to think, because Askren does not have good striking by any means. He might improve, he might not, but I think we know what his game plan is going to be. It's going to be shoot in, take him down, wear him out. And the key factor here, I think, in the fight is Askren's ability to enter on a clean takedown against Lawler. Askren's takedowns are a little... Habib's takedowns are really dynamic. They're very, well, he's a Sambo guy, so Sambo already has that kind of combat advantage. He's a combat Sambo guy. Well, really combat Sambo, but there's a little striking in what he does. But it has that advantage of extremely dynamic takedowns, extremely dynamic wrestling. Askren has that too, but that wrestling is more... It's more dynamic in the ways he gets you to the ground, not in the ways he enters on it. His entries are always the same. He shoots down the center, and he grabs hold of you. And in his words, you feel a new kind of strength once he puts his hands on you. Granted, I don't know that he'll be able to influence Lawler with that kind of strength. And Askren doesn't really seem like the kind of guy who would cut an angle in his wrestling to shoot in on a takedown. From what I've seen of him, he's not really able to... He doesn't seem to like to shoot in on different angles. He shoots down the center, gets his hands on you, and imposes his will. And if he can't do that to Lawler, he's in for a bad time. But if he can do that, then Lawler's in for a really bad time. He's in for a drowning. Now, this is one that I told you I broke the rule on this one. Cody No Chin Garbrandt versus Pedro. I have no idea who you are. I'm sorry, Munoz. My pick here is Cody because of his insane striking speed, his insane hand speed. Plus, in this fight, Cody doesn't have an emotional investment. He's not going to be fighting with no fight IQ. Against Dominic Cruz, we saw a Cody who didn't have an emotional investment in the fight, who was able to fight smart and hard, was able to just go to work with that incredible hand speed and that insane defensive ability, which Garbrandt has for certain. But TJ Dillashaw brought out the worst in him. TJ Dillashaw brought out the aggressive, angry man-child in him that wanted to swing for the finish, that left glaring holes in his game that TJ exploited time and time again. I mean, I think he landed four left hooks flush in a row. Just slip, counter, slip, counter, slip, counter, slip, counter, over and over and over again. It was impressive. It goes to show how much TJ knows Garbrandt and knows his abilities, knows his weaknesses. But at the same time, that was Garbrandt who was fighting very emotionally and very wild. I don't think he'll do that this time. He doesn't have that emotional investment. Therefore, his mentality will be better. Therefore, he might actually he might give Munoz quite a struggle. He'll go to work with that incredible hand speed. But Munoz keeping Cody off his back foot would effectively neutralize that hand speed. You can't push forward and swing strikes if you can't push forward. So I think the key factor there is Munoz's pressure. which might cause Cody to swing wild and get emotional. It's possible. It's possible. So, whew. Last fight of the day. Or, well, actually, this is on the prelim card. So, that's interesting. John Jones' main event, which shoved every other fight down. Alright, so, we have Jeremy, that guy, Stevens, versus Zabit, the hype train, Magomed Sharipov. My pick here is Zabit. The reason? I like him. No, I'm just kidding. He has extremely creative striking and grappling. He has the physical advantages of height and reach, and he has extreme technicality. On the ground, on the feet, he's extremely technical. He's not really a wild fighter. He's a technician. He's an aggressive technician. Kind of like Holloway or Adesanya. But the key factor here is power versus creativity. Can Stevens' power overwhelm the creativity of Zabit? Because Zabit doesn't really have power. I mean, he does, I'm sure. But he has hands that, well, they're not made of stone, I'll tell you that. And his kicks, when they land well. But when they don't, they risk gassing him out. And it's entirely possible for Stevens to see him overreach on a kick and catch him clean. It's entirely possible. I'm not going to say that it's an improbable result. Stevens may very well derail the hype train. But at the same time, I know we're going to get a good fight out of it. So I don't really care. So that's all the fights on the docket for today and next month. Hopefully, if you folks like this, I'll do another video. Maybe on some smaller events. Maybe on some of my favorite fights. I don't know. But whatever happens, I'm confident that we will have a good time with this, because I would like to make this some sort of ongoing thing, potentially. That would be nice. That'd be really nice. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know if you'd like more. Farewell, YouTube.